The realtor stared at the release form, then at me. Derek, are you sure? If you walk away now, you could lose part of the earnest money. I signed my name without pausing. I know. You don't want to wait until Lucas gets back? I set the pen down, aligning it with the edge of her desk. Lucas is in Lake Tahoe. She nodded slowly, her manicured fingers hovering over the keyboard. The company retreat. The retreat ended yesterday. Her pen stopped moving. I looked at the townhouse rendering on the table, the kitchen I had designed, every cabinet and countertop chosen with obsessive precision. The cream-colored living room wall I had spent 2 weekends choosing, driving to 5 different paint stores across the Bay Area, bringing home 17 sample swatches, taping them to the wall in rows, and living with them for days to see how the light changed them from morning to dusk. The place we were supposed to move into after our wedding, after we signed the papers, after we started what I had believed would be the rest of our lives together. Then I said the part that still didn't sound real, even though I had rehearsed it in my head 100 times during the sleepless nights that followed my discovery. He stayed because his ex came up for the weekend. The realtor didn't say anything. What could she say? That maybe I had misunderstood? That there was some innocent explanation I hadn't considered? I had spent 5 years misunderstanding. 5 years of making excuses, of translating neglect into personality traits, of convincing myself that wanting more was somehow a failure of character on my part. 5 years of telling myself that love meant accepting someone exactly as they were, even when who they were left me feeling hollow and unseen. I almost laughed. The sound that came out was closer to a breath, dry and hollow. I swallowed it down. I need to sign the release forms, I said. All of them. The drive home was mechanical. I didn't remember the traffic or the turns or the moment I pulled into the parking garage of our building. I just remembered the weight in my chest, the strange hollow sensation of having made a decision so final that there was no going back. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing that once you stepped off, you couldn't unstep. You could only fall. Our apartment was quiet when I walked in. The living room still held traces of Lucas, his laptop open on the coffee table, a half-empty mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, his favorite hoodie draped over the back of the couch. I had always found comfort in these small signs of his presence. They had made me feel like we were building a life together, like our mundane, everyday objects were evidence of something real and lasting. Now they felt like evidence of something else entirely. Artifacts of a life I had been living without actually being seen in it. Props in a play where I had been cast as the understanding Omega who never asked for too much. I walked to the bedroom and opened my closet. I started pulling out clothes, not with any particular system, just moving on autopilot. Suits, shirts, jeans, sweaters. I threw them onto the bed in a pile that grew steadily larger. Then I stopped and sat down on the edge of the mattress, my hands resting on my knees, my jaw tight enough to ache. The worst part was that I still couldn't prove he had slept with Caleb. There was no hotel room selfie, no kiss captured in a photograph, no explicit message saved in a chat history. Nothing clean enough to hold up and say, there? That's cheating. That's the thing that breaks us. In some ways, that was harder than finding one reckless night would have been. Because what I found was 5 years of Lucas giving another man every version of himself he had told me didn't exist. The romantic version. The thoughtful version. The version that planned ahead and made reservations and cared about details. The version that took beautiful photographs and remembered birthdays and looked forward to weekends. The version that made ordinary moments feel extraordinary because he actually cared enough to try. I had built our entire relationship around the belief that Lucas simply wasn't made that way. That his emotional flatness was a fundamental part of who he was. Something I had to accept if I wanted to be with him. I had told myself that his practicality was a trade-off for his reliability. That I couldn't have both the man who carried me to urgent care and the man who planned romantic getaways. I had made peace with that trade-off. I had called it maturity. That was the lie that broke me. Because the truth was, he had always been capable of both. He had always had it in him to be romantic, thoughtful, attentive, present. He just didn't want to do those things for me. I met Lucas when I was 28. Fresh out of a bad relationship with an alpha who had been all heat and no substance, all passion and no follow-through, I was drawn to Lucas's calm, his steadiness, his almost infuriating composure. He wasn't the kind of man who filled a room with noise and charm. He was the kind of man people called when the room caught fire. The one who showed up with a plan and made everything okay. I was an Omega who had spent too long being burned by alphas who promised the world and delivered nothing but smoke. Lucas promised nothing, and somehow that felt safer. He didn't make grand declarations. He didn't sweep me off my feet. He just showed up, reliably, day after day, and I convinced myself that was what love was supposed to look like. We lived in the East Bay, across the bay from San Francisco. Our apartment was modest but comfortable, with a view of the Bay Bridge that I never tired of looking at. Lucas was practical and almost impossible to rattle. When the dishwasher broke, he fixed it. When my car made a strange noise, he knew exactly what it was. When I had a bad day at work, he made sure there was food in the refrigerator when I got home. That was why I trusted him. That was why I stayed. Because Lucas wasn't cruel to me. He could actually be very good to me. During our second year together, my father had an emergency heart procedure. I got the call at work and panicked so badly I couldn't drive. I remember standing in the office kitchen, my phone pressed to my ear, my mother's voice saying words that didn't make sense. Arteries. Blockage. Surgery. We don't know yet. I remember the way my hands shook, the way my vision blurred. Lucas left a meeting. Something important, I later learned. A presentation to senior leadership that he had been preparing for weeks. He crossed the bay in traffic, navigating the nightmare of Bay Bridge congestion without complaint, and picked me up from my office. He took me to the airport. He booked the ticket himself because my hands were shaking too much to type. He told me it would be fine. He said it with such certainty that I almost believed him. He called every night while I was with my parents. Not long calls, just brief check-ins. How's your dad? How are you holding up? Did you eat something? But they were enough. When my dad came home from the hospital, Lucas sent him a new blood pressure monitor because he had heard my mom say theirs was unreliable during one of our phone conversations. He had been listening. He had paid attention. I remembered that and held it close. A year later, I got a fever so high I could barely stand. I was delirious, hallucinating fragments of dreams, unable to walk in a straight line. Lucas carried me down 2 flights of stairs. I was heavier than him, but he didn't hesitate or complain, and drove me to urgent care at 2 in the morning. He sat beside me under fluorescent lights until sunrise, holding my hand, wiping my forehead with a cold cloth. He didn't complain once. He just stayed. He knew when my car needed maintenance. He fixed things before I asked. If I worked late, there was usually food in the refrigerator, nothing elaborate, but something warm and edible. He replaced the light bulbs when they burned out. He remembered to pay the bills. He showed up. Those were the facts I used whenever something else hurt. Yes, he forgot my birthday once. But he sat with me in urgent care. Yes, he hated planning trips. But he changed my brakes before they became dangerous. Yes, he never helped much with wedding planning. But he had spent 6 months looking at mortgage rates with me, comparing lenders, calculating closing costs. Yes, he was emotionally flat. But he was there. So when my friends asked, carefully, whether he was a little distant, I always defended him. That's just Lucas. I said it so often it became part of our relationship, part of how I define myself. Lucas doesn't do birthdays. Lucas doesn't care about pictures. Lucas thinks Valentine's Day is a scam. Lucas hates planning vacations. Lucas isn't sentimental. Lucas is practical. I translated every disappointment into a personality trait. I made his neglect into a virtue. I turned his indifference into a form of stoicism I could admire. And because he was dependable in a crisis, I convinced myself I was immature for wanting anything more. I told myself that grown-ups didn't need romantic gestures. Grown-ups understood that love was about showing up, not about making a fuss. The Tahoe weekends began during our first year together. His company held an annual client retreat every January, a corporate tradition that brought together executives, investors, and key partners from across the country. The official schedule was Thursday and Friday. Presentations, dinners, networking. All the usual corporate stuff that I never paid much attention to because it was just work. The first year, I asked if I could drive up Friday night. The work part will be over, right? I said. We could ski Saturday. Lucas laughed. You've never skied. You could teach me. You'd hate it. How do you know? He kissed my forehead. Next year. I'll take you when I can actually enjoy it with you. I didn't push. I was 28, still eager to prove I could be a good omega. Not demanding, not needy, not the kind of partner who made unreasonable requests. I had learned from my previous relationship that asking for too much was how you ended up alone. I was determined to be easy to love. The second year I asked again. He said quarter end was brutal, that he would be exhausted, that it wouldn't be fun for either of us. I told myself he was right. I told myself I was being selfish for even asking. The third year I packed his gloves and said nothing. The fourth year I didn't even ask. This year, with our wedding less than 2 months away, he loaded his SUV on Thursday morning. He was in a good mood, whistling as he carried his bag to the car. He came back upstairs because he forgot his charger, and I watched him rummage through the drawer, his brow furrowed. He looked so familiar in that moment, so completely and utterly Lucas, that I felt a wave of affection for him despite everything I didn't yet know. He kissed me at the door. Last Tahoe retreat before I'm a married man. You say that like marriage is prison. It means I'm finally going to have to start doing wedding stuff. You've had 11 months. You're better at it. At least come to the final venue walkthrough. I will. When? He grinned. Next time they schedule one. Next time. I rolled my eyes and kissed him goodbye. I didn't think anything of it. It was just Lucas being Lucas. My practical, unromantic, slightly frustrating fiancé. I loved him anyway. I had decided years ago that this was who he was and that I could live with that. I had no idea that was the last time I would kiss him as someone who still believed in our future. That night, I started clearing out a storage closet because we were supposed to move after the wedding. We had been accumulating boxes for months. Things we didn't need but couldn't throw away, memories in physical form, the detritus of 5 years of living together. I was elbow deep in old electronics and Christmas decorations when my hand brushed against something hard. A camera. An old DSLR, the kind that had been state-of-the-art a decade ago. Lucas had used it in college, back when he thought he might become a photographer. He had abandoned the hobby years ago, but he had never thrown away the equipment. I had seen it sitting in the closet 100 times without ever thinking to pick it up. The battery was almost dead, but it turned on when I pressed the power button. The first picture was snow. White, pristine, endless snow, the kind that only falls in mountains, the kind that blankets everything in silence. The second was Lake Tahoe, shimmering under a winter sun, the water impossibly blue against the white landscape. The third was Caleb. I knew him immediately. How could I not? He had been a presence in Lucas's life long before I came along, a ghost that hovered at the edges of every family gathering, every shared history, every story about Lucas's childhood. He had grown up 3 streets from Lucas. Their mothers were friends. They went to the same schools. They dated for less than a year when they were 17, a teenage romance that had supposedly fizzled out before it could become anything serious. Lucas always described that relationship like a childhood mistake. We were terrible together, he once told me. We were kids. We didn't know what we were doing. Caleb himself made the same joke when I met him. He dropped into a chair beside us at a party and said, smiling, "Don't worry. Lucas and I expired before we could legally drink." Lucas laughed. "We know way too much about each other. It would never work." I believed them. I was proud of believing them. I thought it meant I was secure, mature, evolved. Not one of those omegas who treated every male friend as competition, who saw threats everywhere, who couldn't trust their alpha to have healthy friendships. I was so proud of how evolved I was. The first Tahoe photo was dated 5 years earlier. Caleb wore a red ski jacket and stood with the lake behind him, snow caught in his dark hair. He was laughing at whoever held the camera, Lucas. His face was open, unguarded, the kind of joy that can't be faked. It was the face of someone who felt completely comfortable, completely seen. The next photo showed him beside a stone fireplace. Then at a restaurant, candlelight flickering on his face. Then standing at a scenic overlook, the sun setting behind the mountains. Then sitting on a bench outside the same lodge, a cup of hot chocolate in his hands. I kept scrolling. The battery was fading fast, the screen flickering, but I couldn't stop. The strangest thing was the pattern. Every year, Thursday and Friday were exactly what Lucas had told me. Conference rooms, name badges, co-workers, client dinners. The photos were mundane, the kind of corporate documentation nobody would ever look at twice. Then Friday evening came, and Caleb appeared. 4 years ago, same lodge, same fireplace. 3 years ago, same restaurant, same table near the window. 2 years ago, same overlook, the sun setting behind the mountains. Last year, same little cafe with deer-shaped cookies beside the hot chocolate. 5 winters. 5 identical patterns. It wasn't random. It wasn't that Caleb happened to be in Tahoe a few times. This was a tradition. Their tradition. A weekend they had repeated every year while I sat at home believing Lucas was still entertaining clients, still working hard, too tired to talk. I clicked through picture after picture. There were some group shots, a few friends came up some years, but the majority of the photos were Caleb. And Lucas had taken them beautifully. That was the part that made my hands start shaking. He had thought about the pictures. You could see it in the composition, in the way he had framed each shot. He crouched low to get the lake behind Caleb. He waited for him to turn into the light, timing the shot perfectly. He framed him through cabin windows, using the architecture to create depth. There was one photo of Caleb tying a ski boot that looked like a travel advertisement. The light hitting his face just right, the mountain in the background, the snow pristine and white. Caleb wasn't posing. Nothing special was happening. He was just tying his shoe. And Lucas had cared enough to make an ordinary moment look beautiful. The year before, we had gone to a friend's wedding in Napa. I wore a suit I loved. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind of thing I had saved for months to afford. At sunset, I handed Lucas my phone. Can you take one picture? He took it. My eyes were closed. A waiter was walking behind me. The lighting was terrible. Can you do one more? Lucas had already opened Slack. It's fine. You look fine. I remember laughing, because that was just Lucas. He didn't care about photos. He didn't see the point. It was fine. Except it wasn't. He knew how to wait for light. He knew how to make someone look beautiful. He knew how to preserve a moment. He just didn't do it for me. I put the camera down and sat on the floor. I don't know how long I stayed there, staring at nothing, my mind blank and full at the same time. The apartment was quiet. The bridge lights flickered through the window. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. I was completely alone. Eventually, I opened our laptop. The folders weren't hidden. Tahoe 2022. Tahoe 2023. Tahoe 2024. Nothing romantic, nothing dramatic. Just the same pattern every year. Work until Friday. Caleb after. Then I found something I hadn't noticed before. The hotel booking confirmations. Lucas always told me the company handled his room Thursday and Friday, and he stayed on for networking. But every year, he personally extended the same hotel through Sunday. And every year, Caleb's first photo appeared within hours of the conference ending. I still had no proof they shared a room. But I suddenly understood how carefully Lucas had built his story. He never technically lied about going to Tahoe for work. He simply let me believe the work lasted all weekend. He let me assume. He let me fill in the gaps with my own hopeful imagination. He didn't have to lie because I never asked the right questions. My phone buzzed. A photo from Lucas. Hot chocolate. A deer-shaped cookie. Official stuff is finally over. I'm dead. My stomach turned. 5 years earlier, Caleb had been sitting in front of the same fireplace with the same cup. I texted, "If the official stuff is done, are you coming home tomorrow?" He took 3 minutes to answer. "Still have weekend plans. Sunday like usual." I typed, "Who are the weekend plans with?" The typing bubble appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. People from work and some friends. Is Caleb there? No answer. At 11, he video called me. He was standing in a hotel hallway in a gray sweater, the kind of casual confidence that had always drawn me to him. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like he belonged exactly where he was. Like he had nothing to hide. You okay? Fine. How's the house? Fine. Painter's done. Almost. You spent way too much time on that wall. Cream, gray, whatever. It'll all look the same once furniture is in. I stared at him. That wall had taken me 2 weekends. I had brought home 17 samples. I had lived with them taped to the wall for days, watching how they changed in different light. I had agonized over the decision. Lucas had never once come to look at the paint samples. It matters to me, I said. He shrugged. Then keep the cream. He was about to hang up when a male voice called from somewhere behind him. Lucas. The car's here. My whole body went cold. Lucas. I had never heard anyone call him that. Lucas turned. Coming. Caleb's there. His eyes came back to the screen. A pause. Yeah. Since when? He drove up after the retreat. Caleb. He drove up. Does he do that every year? His expression changed. Derek. What is this? Just answer me. We have friends here. That wasn't my question. He exhaled, a long, impatient sound. Caleb likes skiing. A few of us usually stay. You never told me. Because it's not a secret. I almost laughed. If it's not a secret, why did I think you were working all weekend for 5 years? You assumed that. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not I should have told you. Not you're right. I should have been honest. Just you assumed that. I said okay. He visibly relaxed. Don't do this to yourself before the wedding. Do what? Turn nothing into something. Then he smiled. The same easy smile he had been giving me for 5 years. I'll bring you something back. After we hung up, I walked to the front hall because I suddenly needed air. The apartment felt suffocating, the walls closing in. I opened the coat closet looking for a jacket. That was when I saw the shoes. White canvas sneakers tucked behind Lucas's hiking boots. Size 9. I wear an 11. For 1 second, I thought maybe they belonged to his brother. Then I picked one up. A folded sticky note was tucked inside. Lucas, leaving these here for next Tahoe. The other pair destroyed my feet. Don't let me forget them again. See, I read it twice. Then a third time. Next Tahoe. Not maybe. Not if. Next. Like it was already on the calendar. Like our home was a storage space for his annual trip with my fiancé. I sat on the entryway bench with one of Caleb's shoes in my lap. My jaw tightened. My fists clenched. I didn't cry. Not then. The anger came first, clean and sharp. It burned through me like cold fire. It wasn't because of the shoe. It was because of the ease of it. Caleb had been in our apartment without me. Comfortable enough to leave things there. Comfortable enough to use a nickname I didn't know existed. Comfortable enough to assume there would be another Tahoe. He had touched our space, our life, our home, and Lucas had never once thought I deserved to know. The next morning, I emailed a recruiter in Portland. 6 months earlier, her company had recruited me for a senior role. I made it through the final interview. We discussed salary. Then I withdrew. Lucas didn't want to leave the Bay Area. When I told him about the job, his first question had been, "Why are you applying out of state when we're about to get married?" It's Portland. I don't want to start our marriage long distance. What if you came with me? My career is here. So is mine. He went quiet. Then he kissed my forehead. There'll be other jobs. Let's get settled first. So I said no to Portland. Because there would always be another opportunity. Another year. Another next time. That morning I wrote, "If another role opens, I'd like to talk again." She replied before lunch. Another team was expanding. Because I had already completed the full interview process, they only needed 2 conversations. Could I talk Monday? I said yes. Then I drove to the realtor's office and signed my part of the house release. I knew there could be financial consequences. I did it anyway. I wasn't trying to punish Lucas. I was stopping myself from putting more money into a future I no longer trusted. I made phone calls that afternoon. The venue. The florist. The photographer. Each conversation was the same. Confusion, sympathy, A gentle confirmation that I understood the cancellation fees. I paid them without argument. I organized everything that required Lucas's signature and left it ready for him. I separated my direct deposits. I documented every shared expense. I didn't touch his money. I didn't punish him financially. I just removed myself from the equation. Lucas came home Sunday night. He looked rested. Happy even. He rolled his suitcase in, kissed my cheek, and held out a little paper bag. Got you something. Inside was a wooden memento shaped like a snowy mountain. It was cheap and touristy, the kind of thing you pick up at an airport gift shop when you realize you forgot to buy a souvenir. I looked at it. Thanks. Caleb picked it. He said it casually, like it was nothing. He said the other one looked cheap. For 5 years, Lucas had brought me little Tahoe souvenirs. A coaster. A keychain. A magnet. I used to line them up on our refrigerator and think he thought of me. I kept them like precious artifacts, evidence that he remembered me while he was away. Now I realized Caleb had been there while he bought them. This year, he had literally chosen mine. Lucas took off his coat. A jewelry store bag slipped from the pocket. I picked it up. This too. He reached for it. No. Caleb's birthday? What did you get him? A necklace. You chose it. Yeah. Today. No. It was custom. I ordered it a couple months ago. I stared at him. A couple months? What? My birthday had been in March the previous year. I made dinner. His favorite. Something I had to look up a recipe for. I bought a small cake. I set the table with candles. I waited. Lucas came home after 10, saw the candles, and froze. Oh shit. I laughed because otherwise I would have cried. You forgot. Work has been insane. He hugged me. I'll make it up this weekend. That weekend, a friend invited him to play golf. He went. My birthday disappeared. I had told myself Lucas wasn't a birthday person. Some people just didn't care about that stuff. It didn't mean he loved me less. Except he could order a custom necklace 2 months early. He could plan. He could remember. He could care about details. He just had categories. Things worth doing for Caleb. Things Derek would understand. That night, I asked, do you think you put more effort into Caleb than you put into me? Lucas was answering email in bed, his laptop balanced on his knees. He sighed. What happened now? Nothing happened. I'm asking. He's been my friend forever. That doesn't answer me. A lot of things with Caleb are habit. The Tahoe weekends are habit. He looked at me. So you went through my camera. You lied to me. I did not lie. You let me think you were working all weekend. I was there for work. Until Friday. We had plans after with Caleb. With friends. And you never once thought to say, hey, my ex comes up every year, and we spend the weekend together? He rubbed his face. You're making it sound dirty because you're upset. What about the shoes? That stopped him. What shoes? The white ones in our closet. His jaw tightened. He left them here after he came over with everyone a few months ago. I wasn't here. You were visiting your parents. So he came to our apartment while I was gone. Left shoes for your next trip together. And that's normal. Lucas. Why does he call you Lucas? His face hardened. Seriously? I didn't know that was your nickname. It's not. It's something he called me when we were kids. And he still calls you that. He has for 20 years. I nodded slowly. Of course. He closed the laptop. You know what? I don't understand what you want me to say. I want you to tell me why everything I ask for is too much, but with him it's effortless. That's not true. You plan trips with him. I don't plan them. He comes up. You take beautiful pictures of him. He went very still. You ordered his birthday gift 2 months early. He gave me an expensive pen last year. You forget my birthday. I forgot one birthday. You bring him into our home. He leaves things here. He knows your mother better than I do. This is getting ridiculous. Is it? Yes. His voice rose, the first time I had ever heard him raise it at me. Then he said the sentence that ended something in me. I'm marrying you, Derek. Isn't that enough? I stared at him. He meant it. That was the worst part. In Lucas's mind, marriage was the final argument. I got the ring, the house, the vows, the practical future. So what did it matter if Caleb got the weekends? What did it matter if Caleb got the beautiful pictures? What did it matter if he remembered Caleb's birthday, shared private traditions with him, let him leave things in our home, and gave him access to parts of himself I had spent years being told were unavailable. I was the man he planned to marry. Therefore, I had no right to complain about anything else. You're right, I said. His shoulders dropped. It's enough. The next day, we went to his mother's house for Sunday dinner. The first thing she asked me was, which wedding favors did you choose from Caleb's list? I stopped in the doorway. What list? His mother blinked. He didn't send them? She opened her phone and showed me photos of small candles, custom tags, ribbon samples, even our wedding colors. Caleb thinks these fit your theme better. I looked at Lucas. You showed him a wedding mood board? He poured coffee, completely unbothered. He asked what we were doing, and I sent it to him. He shrugged. What's the big deal? His mother jumped in. Caleb's good at this stuff. You're so busy, Derek. Honestly, he saved me hours. Saved her hours planning my wedding. I remembered when Lucas and I first got engaged. I suggested we start coming to his mother's house more often. Maybe Sunday dinner a couple times a month. Lucas said, don't. She likes her space. So I came once a month. Sometimes less. I thought I was respecting her boundaries. Then Caleb walked into the kitchen and reached straight for the cabinet with Lucas's mother's favorite mug. He knew which salad dressing she liked. He knew where the extra napkins were. He knew exactly how long to microwave the bread because she hates it too hot. I asked later how often Caleb came by. Lucas's mother said casually, most Sundays. He's family. Family. I smiled because I didn't trust my face. At dinner, she said, if you get stuck on anything for the wedding, ask Caleb. He knows Lucas better than anyone. The table went quiet. Lucas kept eating. I looked at him. He shrugged. They grew up together. Again, always the same defense. As if knowing someone first gave them permanent first access. By Friday, I had finished my first Portland interview. It went well. The team was sharp, the work was interesting, and the salary was significantly higher than what I was making. I could see myself there. I could see a future there. That night, we met several of Lucas's college friends for dinner at a trendy restaurant in the city. Caleb was already there when we arrived, seated at the end of the table like he had always been part of this group. He was wearing the necklace. Of course he was. It was delicate gold, a small custom pendant at his throat. It caught the light whenever he moved. One of the men at the table noticed it. That's gorgeous. Birthday present. Caleb smiled and touched it. Yeah. From who? Lucas answered. Me. The table went quiet. Not dramatically, just enough. I could feel everyone processing it, trying to figure out if this was normal or strange. A guy across from us raised his eyebrows. Damn, Lucas. Custom jewelry for the ex. Caleb laughed. Ancient history. Then he leaned toward Lucas and said, he still knows what I like. He said it lightly. Maybe he meant nothing by it. But I watched Lucas smile. That smile hurt more than the necklace. One of the men looked at me. Okay, now I have to ask. What did he get you? Lucas answered again. Derek doesn't care about stuff like that. I felt every person at the table hear it. Derek doesn't care. He had turned my resignation into a personality. My silence into a preference. My lack of demands into a complete absence of needs. Someone changed the subject to skiing. A man I barely knew said, Derek, you must be good if you survive Tahoe with Lucas every year. I've never been. He blinked. What? I don't ski. Lucas cut in. He hates the cold. I turned toward him. When did I say that? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Caleb smiled awkwardly. He probably mixed you up with somebody. A few minutes later, he said, actually, Tahoe is kind of our thing. It has been forever. The sentence was casual. That almost made it worse. Our thing. I looked at Lucas. He stared at his drink. For 5 years I had asked to go. For 5 years he had said next time. And apparently everyone else knew Tahoe belonged to them. Later, Caleb followed me toward the restroom. Derek. I stopped. I really hope tonight didn't feel weird. I almost laughed. Weird. He continued. Lucas and I have a lot of old traditions. Sometimes I forget how they might look from the outside. Like Tahoe. He hesitated. Yeah. Did you know he told me he was working all weekend? His expression changed. What? For 5 years. I thought you knew. Clearly. He looked uncomfortable. I always assumed he told you I came up after the conference. He didn't. Caleb glanced away. Then my phone lit up in my hand. Our interior designer had sent a photo of the townhouse living room. Caleb looked down. Oh, you kept the cream wall. I lifted my eyes. How do you know about the wall? He froze for half a second. Lucas showed me the plans. What? He asked what I thought. I almost couldn't speak. What did you think? He gave a small nervous laugh. Warm gray. He agreed. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow. The house I was buying. The wall I had agonized over. The man who told me whatever you like. He had opinions. He just preferred discussing them with Caleb. Caleb touched my arm. Derek, I'm not trying to come between you. I looked at his hand until he removed it. No, I said quietly. You don't have to. On the drive home, Lucas asked what was wrong. Nothing. Is this still the necklace? No. Then what? Caleb said Tahoe is your thing. He stared at the road. That's just how he talks. He also knew about the living room wall. He exhaled. I asked his opinion once. You never asked mine. You picked the color. Because you told me you didn't care. It's paint. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Of course. What does that mean? It means you're right. About what? It's not about paint. He drove in silence. 3 days later, Portland offered me the job. Higher salary. Bigger team. For weeks until my start date. I accepted without hesitation. The next morning, I gave notice at work. My boss was surprised but supportive. He had always known I was capable of more. Then I started canceling the wedding. Venue. Photographer. Florist. The contracts in my name I terminated and paid the fees. Anything requiring Lucas's approval I organized and left ready for him. The house release was already moving through escrow. I separated my direct deposits and documented every shared expense. I didn't touch his money. I didn't punish him financially. I just removed myself. And while I was doing it, Lucas still thought we were fine. That was the part that should have been unbelievable. It wasn't. One night, he saved dinner for me in the refrigerator. The next morning, he took my car in because a maintenance light came on. He was still being the version of himself I had used to justify staying. Responsible, helpful, reliable. And I finally understood that reliability had become the camouflage for everything else. A man can take care of your car and still neglect your heart. A man can sit beside you in urgent care and still build a private emotional life with another man. A man can love you and still believe your unhappiness is harmless because you have never made him pay attention to it. Saturday afternoon, Lucas put on a clean shirt. Caleb's moving. I told him I'd help. I was sealing a box. Okay. He nodded toward it. What's all that? Old stuff. Donating. Some. He grabbed his keys. We'll probably get dinner after. Don't wait. I won't. At the door, he looked back. Are you still upset? No. Really? He smiled. I knew you weren't the kind of person who'd stay mad over something like this. Then he left. I stood in the apartment after the door closed. That sentence explained our entire relationship. Lucas thought I was easygoing. What I had actually been was quiet. He thought I didn't need much. What I had actually done was stop asking. He thought nothing hurt me very badly. What I had actually done was heal privately, so he would never have to feel uncomfortable. By 9 that night, my last box was in the car. I placed my engagement ring in the middle of the dining table. Next to it, I left the house paperwork, wedding cancellations, and a spreadsheet of our remaining shared expenses. I wrote one note. You always said there would be a next time. There isn't one now. At 11:40 p.m., I was sitting at the airport when Lucas called. I let it ring. He called again. Then again. The messages started. Where are you? What are these papers? Why is the house being canceled? Did you cancel the wedding venue? Derek, answer me. Then, is this seriously because of Caleb? I stared at that one. Finally, I replied, no. His call came instantly. What the hell are you doing? His voice was panicked. You canceled the house? Yes. The wedding? Yes. Why would you do that without talking to me? I almost laughed. Because I talked to you for 5 years. What does that even mean? It means I asked to travel with you. I asked you to remember my birthday. I asked you to help plan our wedding. I asked you to take one good picture of me. Silence. Every time, you told me next time. That is not a reason to destroy our life. Caleb never had to wait for next time. He inhaled sharply. There is nothing going on with Caleb. I don't care if you slept with him. He went completely silent. I really don't. Then what is this? It's finding out you weren't bad at romance. You weren't too practical to plan trips. You weren't too busy to prepare birthday gifts. You weren't bad at pictures. You weren't somebody who didn't care about little things. My boarding group was called. I stood. You just didn't do those things with me. That is insane. Is it? I'm marrying you. I know. I chose you. No, Lucas. My voice cracked. You chose me for the life you wanted to build. What does that mean? It means I got the mortgage and the wedding spreadsheets and the practical future. He got everything you were excited about. That is not true. He got Tahoe every year. We went places. We drove to Sacramento for your cousin's graduation. He got your beautiful pictures. I take pictures of everyone. No. You photograph him. He was quiet. He got birthday gifts you planned months ahead. He got your mother. He left shoes in our home for your next secret weekend. It wasn't secret. Then why didn't I know? Silence. He knew your opinions about our house before I did. He still said nothing. You thought giving me marriage meant you could give him everything else, and I would be grateful. That's not what I thought. Then tell me what you thought. Nothing. Finally, fine. I won't go to Tahoe with him anymore. I close my eyes. I'll tell my mom to stop involving him. Lucas, we can travel. I'll take you anywhere. Lucas. He stopped. You're fixing Caleb. What? You're fixing Tahoe. The necklace. Your mother. What else am I supposed to fix? The part where I had to leave before you cared. His breathing changed. I cared. You cared enough to assume I would stay. That's not fair. It's true. Derek, come home. No. We need to talk face to face. No more next time. I hung up. The next morning, Lucas finally understood I was gone. He told me later that at first he assumed I had gone to a friend's place to make a point. Then he opened the closet. Half empty. Bathroom cleared out. My book's gone. My work shoes gone. My employer already knew I was leaving. The realtor knew. The venue knew. The florist knew. The photographer knew. Everyone knew my future had changed. Except my fiancé. His mother called, furious. What are we telling the family? What about the deposits? How could Derek do this without sitting down with us? Lucas said for the first time he didn't know how to defend himself. Because there was no single confession. No single night. No one obvious betrayal he could isolate and apologize for. There were 5 years of choices. That was harder. He also went to see Caleb. I only know the parts he told me later. Apparently, he was genuinely shocked when he realized I had never known. He joined you in Tahoe after the company retreat. I thought he knew. Lucas said he had never told him that. You never told me he didn't. Caleb gave the necklace back. And then he said the one thing Lucas repeated to me, almost word for word. I never asked you to choose me over him. You just kept doing it. That was the sentence that mattered. Caleb had crossed boundaries. He had enjoyed being the special one. He had left shoes in our home, kept private traditions with my fiancé, accepted custom jewelry, helped plan my wedding, and called Tahoe our thing. I was never going to pretend he was innocent. But Lucas was the one who had promised me a future. Lucas was the one who had spent 5 years making space for Caleb while asking me to make myself smaller. For the next 2 weeks, he sent messages every day. I won't go to Tahoe with Caleb again. I talked to my mom. We can buy another house. We can have a smaller wedding. I can move to Portland. I can work remotely. We'll travel. I'll fix your birthday. I'll do this right. I didn't answer. Every message was an answer to a question I had asked years earlier. That was what made them useless. 6 months earlier, if Lucas had said, come to Tahoe after the retreat, I would have packed before he finished the sentence. If he had planned one birthday, I would have bragged about it for weeks. If he had shown up to one wedding appointment and cared enough to disagree with me, I would have felt like we were building something together. Now he was offering me everything because he was afraid. I didn't want the best version of his love to appear only after I became capable of leaving. For weeks later, I started my new job in Portland. My apartment was small, barely enough space for my furniture. My kitchen barely fit one person. Half my boxes stayed unpacked for weeks. I slept on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't bring myself to assemble the bed frame. I love the quiet. Not every day. Some nights I sat on the floor of my empty living room, staring at the ceiling, jaw tight, fists clenched. I thought about the man who drove me to the airport when my dad was sick. I thought about the food in the fridge. I thought about the shape of his body sleeping beside me. I thought about the sound of his breathing in the dark. I didn't cry. I wouldn't let myself. Not for him. Leaving someone does not erase the good things they did. It just means the good things were no longer enough to make the bad ones livable. I started therapy. I started running, mostly because I needed something to do with my hands and my legs and my restless mind. I started cooking meals for one, which was depressing at first and then strangely liberating. I started remembering who I was before I became half of a couple. I started running in the mornings, usually before sunrise. The streets of Portland were quiet at that hour, still and dark and full of possibility. I would put on my headphones and run along the waterfront, watching the light change over the river. The Willamette was a ribbon of gray in the early dawn, the bridges arching over it like sleeping giants. It was the only time my mind went quiet. The only time I didn't think about Lucas or Caleb or the life I had left behind. The first week, I could barely make it a mile. My lungs burned, my legs ached, and I had to stop and walk every few minutes. But I kept going. I would slow to a walk, catch my breath, and then start running again. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move. I needed to feel something other than the hollow ache in my chest. By the second week, I could run 2 miles without stopping. By the third week, 3, I started tracking my distance on my phone, watching the numbers climb. It gave me something to focus on, something measurable. Every run was proof that I was getting stronger. Every run was a small victory. I discovered that running had a rhythm to it, a cadence that matched my heartbeat. Step, step, breathe. Step, step, breathe. It was meditative in a way I hadn't expected. The world would blur around me, and all that existed was the path ahead, the sound of my feet on the pavement, the steady rhythm of my breath. In those moments, I wasn't Derek the broken Omega. I was just Derek the runner. Derek the man who kept moving forward no matter what. Therapy was harder. My therapist was a beta woman in her 60s named Helena. She had kind eyes and a way of sitting very still that made me want to fill the silence with honesty. Her office was small and warm, filled with plants and soft lighting. A framed print of a mountain landscape hung on the wall. Banff, I later realized. At first, I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long keeping my feelings to myself that I didn't know how to let them out. Tell me about the first time you knew something was wrong, Helena said during our second session. I thought about it. I thought about all the little moments, all the tiny disappointments that had accumulated like stones in a riverbed. There was no first time, I said. It was 1,000 small times. 1,000 moments where I asked for something, and he said no. 1,000 moments where I hoped, and he disappointed. 1,000 moments where I told myself I was being unreasonable. How did that feel? I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that surprised me. Like I was drowning, but I didn't know it. Because I was so used to the water that I didn't even realize I was underwater. Helena nodded. That's a very common experience for omegas in relationships with alphas who don't see them. We're conditioned to think that being easy to love means being easy to neglect. But love isn't about asking for nothing. Love is about asking for everything and trusting that the other person will rise to meet you. I sat with that for a moment. I don't think I ever asked for everything. I was too scared of the answer. And what were you scared of? Being told I was too much. Being told I was demanding. Being told I wasn't worth the effort. She leaned forward slightly. And what did you learn from this relationship? I thought about it. I thought about the photos, the shoes, the necklace, the wall. I thought about all the times I had swallowed my disappointment and called it maturity. I learned that I was never the problem, I said. I was just with the wrong person. Helena smiled. That's a good start. I didn't cry in therapy. I had done enough crying. But I started to understand something. I had spent 5 years being a placeholder. Not a partner. Not a lover. A placeholder. Someone who was good enough for the practical parts of life, but not for the emotional ones. Someone who could be relied on, but not cherished. Someone who would stay no matter what, and therefore didn't need to be one. I didn't want to be a placeholder anymore. I started running longer distances. I signed up for a 10K race, something I had never done before, something that scared me. Training gave me something to focus on other than my grief. When I was running, I wasn't thinking about Lucas. I wasn't thinking about Caleb. I wasn't thinking about the wedding or the house or any of the other things I had left behind. I was just thinking about the next step, the next mile, the next breath. It felt good. It felt like progress. I would get up at 5 in the morning, pull on my running shoes, and head out the door before the city woke up. The streets were empty, the air cold and clean. I would run along the waterfront, past the industrial buildings and the empty lots, past the bridges that spanned the river. I would watch the sky turn from black to gray to pink, and I would feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. Something that was still going, still moving, still alive. I learned to recognize the other early morning runners. There was the woman with the golden retriever who always ran past me around mile 2. There was the older man with the gray beard who ran in perfect rhythm, never varying his pace. There was the young couple who held hands while they ran, a sight that made my chest ache with a longing I didn't want to name. Sometimes, when I was running, I would think about what my life would have been like if I had stayed. I would imagine myself in that townhouse, on that cream-colored couch, in that cold bedroom. I would imagine myself growing older, smaller, quieter, until I disappeared entirely. I would imagine myself becoming the kind of Omega who had stopped asking altogether, who had accepted that this was all love would ever be. And then I would run faster. I started going to a gym. I lifted weights. It felt good to be strong, to feel my body working, to tire myself out so much that I fell asleep without thinking. I started with light weights, just enough to feel a burn, and worked my way up. I liked the way my muscles felt after a good workout, the pleasant ache that reminded me I was alive. I made friends. Slowly, awkwardly. A coworker named Jenna invited me to a trivia night at a bar near my apartment. I went. We lost spectacularly. Came in dead last, actually, and I laughed harder than I had in months. Jenna had a dry sense of humor and a way of making everything sound ridiculous. She told terrible jokes and didn't care if anyone laughed. I found myself looking forward to the next trivia night. I started going to a coffee shop on weekends. It was a small place with mismatched furniture and a cat that slept in the window. I would bring a book or my laptop and sit in the corner, reading or working or just watching people. I started to feel like I belonged in Portland. Like this was my city now. Like I had a place here. I started cooking again. I had loved cooking when I was younger, before I had started cooking for Lucas. I had forgotten how good it felt to make something just for myself, to experiment with flavors and ingredients without worrying about whether someone else would like it. I made elaborate meals that I ate alone, and I didn't care. I made terrible meals that I threw away, and I didn't care. I made simple meals that were perfect, and I savored every bite. I took up photography again, not seriously, just with my phone. I walked around Portland and took pictures of things that caught my eye. A bridge at sunset, a dog in a park, a street musician playing guitar, a row of autumn trees turning gold and red. I didn't care if they were good. I just wanted to see if I could learn to notice things again. I wanted to see if I could find beauty in ordinary moments, the way Lucas had found beauty in Caleb. At first, my photos were clumsy and unfocused. I didn't have an eye for it, but I kept practicing. I looked up tutorials online. I learned about composition and lighting and perspective. I learned that you could take a photo of something mundane and make it extraordinary, just by paying attention. That was what I had been missing, I realized. That was what Lucas had given to Caleb and withheld from me. Not the skill, the attention, the willingness to see someone fully, to capture them as they were, to preserve a moment because it mattered. I started taking photos of myself. Not selfies, exactly, just photos of my hands, my reflection in windows, my shadow on the pavement. I wanted to document my own existence. I wanted to prove to myself that I was here, that I was real, that I mattered. And gradually, without noticing exactly when it happened, I stopped checking my phone for messages from Lucas. I stopped waiting for the apology that would make everything make sense. I stopped hoping. I stopped wanting. I just started living. The first time I realized I hadn't thought about Lucas in a whole day, I was standing in my kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. It was a simple vegetable soup, nothing special, but it smelled good, and it was warm, and it was mine. I had made it for myself, because I was hungry, because I deserved to eat. And in that moment, I didn't feel sad or angry or bitter. I just felt normal. It was the best feeling I had had in years. That winter, a few coworkers invited me to Banff. My first instinct was to say no. I had spent so long being the Omega who didn't need things, who didn't take up space, who didn't ask for more. I was still learning how to say yes. Then I realized I didn't have a reason to say no. So I went. The drive from the airport was breathtaking. The mountains rose out of the earth like ancient giants, their peaks white and sharp against the blue sky. I pressed my face to the window like a child, watching them grow larger as we approached. I had never seen anything like it. The lake was frozen solid, a vast sheet of ice that stretched to the mountains. The peaks looked unreal, like something from a painting, their white caps sharp against the brilliant blue sky. The cold was the kind of cold that made your lungs ache and your face sting, the kind that reminded you that you were alive. A coworker offered to take my picture. I stood near the edge of the lake and smiled. He took one, then looked at the screen. Wait, the light is awful. Let me do one more. I almost laughed. For some reason, that tiny sentence hit harder than anything Lucas had said in Portland. I remembered standing in a hotel garden years earlier. Can you take one more? It's fine. You look fine. For years, I thought becoming an adult meant learning not to care about little things. Birthdays, pictures, trips. Who remembered what you said? Who made room for you? Who thought something mattered simply because it mattered to you? I was wrong. Those are not little things. They are the relationship. My coworker lifted the phone again. Ready? I smiled. Yeah. He took another picture. This time I didn't accept good enough. I don't anymore.